Part 1. The Fall from the Mound. The first time Mason Cade held a baseball, he was 5 years old, barefoot, in his grandfather's backyard. It wasn't much, just a scuffed-up Little League ball, its leather stained with years of use. But when his small fingers curled around it, the world seemed to sharpen. He could feel, even then, that it was more than a toy. It was a promise. By the time Mason turned 24, he was the starting pitcher for the Ashford Hawks, a team that had been a joke in the league until his rookie season turned them into contenders. The city adored him. Fans were his number, 27, like a badge of faith. He had a fastball that could carve the air at 99 miles per hour and a changeup that left batters flailing. And he had Damon Vale. Damon wasn't just a teammate. He was Mason's catcher, his best friend, and to the public eye, his brother in all but blood. They'd met in the minors, clawed their way up the rankings together, and promised each other that when the Hawks finally took the championship, they'd do it side by side. That promise lasted until the night of the 2032 League Finals. It was the bottom of the 8th inning, Game 7. The Hawks were up by 1. Mason had been on fire all season, and tonight was no different, until the moment Damon called for a pitch Mason never used in high-stakes moments, the high inside curve. Mason hesitated. Damon gave the sign again. Against his instincts, Mason delivered. The batter crushed it, a towering home run that cleared the fence by a mile. The Hawks lost in the 9th. And within hours, sports media had its story. Mason Cade choked under pressure. His career had peaked, and his arrogance had cost his team the title. In the following weeks, the fallout was brutal. The Hawks front office announced they were rebuilding, a polite way of saying Mason was being traded. His endorsements evaporated. Rumors swirled that he had been gambling on his own games, that he had ignored Damon's calls for safer pitches, that his arm was shot.
Mason tried to reach Damon. Texts, calls, even showing up at his apartment. But Damon was never there. Instead, Damon appeared on talk shows, shaking his head, saying things like, "I don't know what happened to Mason. He wasn't himself that night." By the end of the month, Mason learned the truth. Damon had signed a massive 5-year deal with the Hawks, a deal contingent on Mason being traded. In every interview, Damon painted himself as the loyal catcher who had tried to hold the team together while his old friend spiraled. It was Damon who leaked the gambling rumors. It was Damon who told management Mason's fastball was dying. It was Damon who sold him out for money and fame. Mason didn't scream. He didn't throw things. He didn't even tell anyone what he'd learned. He just sat in his empty apartment, surrounded by unopened moving boxes, and listened to an old recording of Damon's voice, the two of them drunk on victory after their first minor league championship. "No matter what, Mace, you and me, always." Mason played it over and over until the words didn't sound like words anymore. That was when the idea began to take root. It didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, the way Damon's eyes darted when he lied, the way he loved the cameras just a little too much, the way he feared anything that made him look weak. Mason realized he knew Damon better than anyone. Every flaw, every insecurity, every ambition. If Damon had used that knowledge to destroy him, then Mason would use it to burn Damon's life down to the foundations. And he wouldn't do it quickly. He'd do it like a pitcher setting up the perfect strikeout. 3 perfect pitches, each one leading the batter exactly where he wanted him to go.
Mason left town quietly, taking a short-term contract in a foreign league that barely made the news back home. The sports world assumed he was finished. Damon's star rose higher.
What Damon didn't notice was that Mason was watching every move he made, every interview, every endorsement, every off-season appearance. He wasn't just tracking Damon's career, he was mapping his life, who he talked to, who he owed favors to, who he trusted, who he feared. By the time Mason returned to the States 2 years later, the plan had already begun, and Damon Vale had no idea the first pitch had been thrown. Part 2. The Setup. Damon Vale's rise was meteoric. By the 2034 season, he was the face of the Ashford Hawks, captain, league favorite, beloved by fans and sponsors alike. He had his own endorsement line, a luxury apartment overlooking the river, and a girlfriend whose social media presence was nearly as famous as his batting average. Mason Cade watched it all from a distance. He wasn't hiding, not exactly. His return to the States came through a quiet signing with the Linton Mariners, a team so far from contention that the media barely mentioned his name. He pitched well, but not spectacularly, just enough to keep his stats respectable. The goal wasn't to shine. The goal was to become invisible. Because invisible men can get close without being noticed. The first move was subtle. So subtle Damon never saw it. Mason had contacts in the Hawks minor league system, old teammates who still remembered when Damon was just another catcher fighting for a roster spot. Through them, Mason learned that the Hawks' new rookie catcher, Adrian Mott, was something of a prodigy. Sharp instincts, fast hands, and an easy charm with the pitching staff.
More importantly, Adrian had the kind of charisma Damon hated. The quiet, effortless kind that made everyone like him without him even trying. Mason didn't tell Adrian to challenge Damon. He just made sure Adrian got noticed. A well-timed tip to a sports blogger about Adrian's incredible spring training stats. A leaked video clip of him catching a near-impossible pitch. A friendly, anonymous source feeding analysts comparisons between Adrian and Damon, always skewed in Adrian's favor. By mid-season, whispers had started. Is Damon past his prime? Is Adrian Mott the future of the Hawks? And Damon brushed it off publicly, but Mason knew him too well. The seed was planted, and Damon's mind was fertile ground for paranoia. The second move came off the field. Damon's girlfriend, Kira Lorne, was a fixture in the sports scene, glamorous, ambitious, and always working the room. Mason remembered seeing her once at a post-game gala, long before she'd ever met Damon. She had that hungry look in her eyes, the kind that never faded once it was there. Through a mutual contact, an old sports agent Mason had helped years ago, Mason made sure Kira was introduced to a few choice people. Talent scouts for a rival team's broadcast network. Fashion brands looking for influencers, producers working on a reality show about athlete wives. None of it had anything to do with Damon directly, but it all kept her busy, away from home, surrounded by people who whispered about how much more she could have if she weren't tied down to a man whose best years might already be behind him. Mason didn't have to tell her anything. People like Kira only needed opportunity. The third move took years to build.
Every player has habits. Damon's was a private poker game held once a month, invitation only, in a high-rise apartment belonging to a wealthy team sponsor. Mason knew Damon liked the game because it gave him a sense of control, off the field, among people who admired him without question. Mason also knew Damon wasn't as good a player as he thought. It took nearly a year of patient maneuvering, but eventually, Mason got a friend, a quiet, calculating man named Rafe, into that game. Rafe played small at first, losing just enough to blend in. Then he started winning. Not enough to humiliate Damon, but enough to make Damon start chasing losses. It was harmless at first, until Rafe introduced Damon to a higher stakes table. Different crowd, different rules, and absolutely no mercy. Mason didn't need Damon to go broke. He just needed Damon to start playing with the wrong people. By the start of the 2036 season, Damon's edges were fraying. He was snapping at teammates. He started demanding that the Hawks management bench Adrian Mott during critical games, an impossible request given Adrian's growing fan base. The press started noticing tension between the two catchers. Kira was spending more and more time on the West Coast for her projects. She and Damon were rarely photographed together anymore. And twice in the last month, Damon had been seen in the company of a businessman with a reputation for making people disappear over unpaid debts. Mason played it cool, staying far from the spotlight. When he pitched against the Hawks, he treated Damon like any other opponent. No trash talk, no theatrics. But every strikeout, every walk-off loss Damon suffered against Mason's Mariners felt like a private message between them. I'm still here, and I'm not done yet.
One rainy night, after a game, Mason sat in his small apartment, watching a live interview of Damon on a sports channel. Damon looked tired, defensive, a little too rehearsed when answering questions about his partnership with Adrian Mott. The reporter asked, "You and Mason Cade, do you still keep in touch?" There was a flicker, just for a moment. Damon's eyes narrowed, his jaw tensed. "No," Damon said finally. "Mason's not the person I thought he was." Mason smiled. The count was 0-2. One more perfect pitch, and the game would be over.
Part 3. The Final Inning. It started with a single headline. Hawks captain under investigation for gambling connections. The article was careful with its wording. Sources suggest, allegedly, no official charges. But Mason knew how the media worked. Once a story like that appeared, the truth almost didn't matter. The smell would stick. Damon called it garbage in every interview. He said he'd never bet on a game in his life, and technically that was true. But Mason had made sure the people Damon played cards with weren't exactly free of suspicion. The league launched an internal review. It was standard procedure, they said. But Damon was forced to step down as team captain until the matter was resolved. It was the first time in 7 years Damon wasn't the face of the Hawks. The second headline landed 2 weeks later. Kira Lorne signs West Coast reality deal, moves to Los Angeles. No breakup announcement, no statement from Damon. Just Kira smiling on a red carpet in a silver dress, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a young Hollywood producer. Mason hadn't told her to leave Damon. He hadn't needed to. He'd simply made sure she had a dozen other doors open by the time the one to Damon's apartment started to close. By mid-season, Damon's stats were tanking. Every at-bat looked desperate. He fought with coaches over game strategy. Adrian Mott, now the clear starting catcher, was being praised as the Hawks' future. The fans loved him. The broadcasters loved him. The sponsors loved him. Mason watched the games from his hotel rooms during road trips, sipping coffee while Damon stumbled through post-game interviews, eyes darting, voice cracking. But Mason wasn't after public humiliation alone. That was too simple, too short-lived. Damon could fade away, reinvent himself somewhere else, still believe he'd been unlucky. No. Mason needed Damon to know, to understand.
The final move was the cruelest. Damon had a younger sister, Lila. Quiet, shy, 10 years younger than him. Mason had met her once, briefly, when she'd come to watch a Hawks game years ago. She'd been in college then, studying journalism, blushing when Mason had shaken her hand.
Through a mutual friend in the Mariners' PR department, Mason found out that Lila was now working as a junior producer for a sports documentary series. Her current project? A behind-the-scenes special on the Ashford Hawks. It was perfect. Mason reached out through the production team, offering to be interviewed for a retrospective piece about his early years in the league. Lila was assigned to coordinate the interview. They met in a coffee shop, public and safe. Mason was warm, friendly, professional. He told her stories about her brother from their rookie days, stories Damon had never shared with her. She laughed. She asked questions. She started to trust him. Over the next few months, they spoke more, always under the guise of research for the documentary. Mason let her think she was drawing the story out of him, when in reality, he was planting every detail. He told her about the misunderstanding that had ended his career with the Hawks, how Damon had distanced himself, how Mason had never blamed him, even though Damon's statement to the press back then had quietly destroyed Mason's reputation. He didn't accuse, he didn't rant. He let Lila draw her own conclusions, and she did. By the time the documentary aired, Lila's relationship with Damon had soured completely. Damon called Mason the night the episode went live. Mason let it go to voicemail. "Stay away from my family." Damon's voice was raw, ragged. "I know what you're doing." Mason saved the message. The next week, the Hawks announced Damon's contract would not be renewed at the end of the season. No farewell tour, no ceremony, just a short press release thanking him for his years of service. He finished the year on the bench, watching Adrian Mott lead the team to the playoffs. The real final act came quietly, almost politely. Mason sent Damon a package, no return address, no note inside, just a single baseball. On the sweet spot, in Mason's sharp handwriting, were 3 words: "Counts full now." The fallout was complete. Damon moved back to his hometown, away from the cameras. His public appearances stopped. His name faded from sports headlines. Lila never reconciled with him. Kira married the Hollywood producer. Adrian Mott became the Hawks' captain. And Mason? He retired the following year, arm injuries finally catching up with him. He bought a small house near the coast, far from the stadium lights. He told himself he was done. But on quiet nights, when the wind came in off the water, he'd pour a drink, take that voicemail from Damon out of storage, and play it back. Not for gloating, not exactly, just to remember the sound of a man who finally understood. And the cost? Mason never played another game without wondering if he'd gone too far. He had his revenge, but it had taken years of his life, years spent thinking about Damon instead of living his own. The victory was his, but so was the emptiness that followed. End of story.